Hello and welcome back to the RevOps Show. Recently, Jess has noticed with our clients that there is this want for a perfect database, and while she thinks there's a perfect database in theory, that's not the case in reality. To her surprise, Doug thinks very differently on this. Today, you'll get to take more of an inside look into what Jess's insights and thoughts are as she and Doug workshop the quote-unquote perfect database, what the problem is with it, and what causes this problem. It's a time for learning, and you'll get to see a little bit of how Imagine operates through this discussion. So, what are we waiting for? Let's get started.
Jess,
Doug,
it's a Monday.
it is a Monday.
Have you had coffee?
I have had coffee.
Okay, I got an extra cup because I know you got something planned for today, so I want to make sure that I'm able to handle it.
Are you worried you're not gonna be able to handle it?
I'm always worried I'm not going to be able to handle it, Jess.
I find that hard to believe.
I fake it really well. What can I tell you?
You do. You do.
I'm just a nervous boy out on the street by his lonesome.
That was my plan when I first came on. Just fake it till you make it.
Well, you did a good job.
There we go.
Or maybe you still are doing a good job.
Maybe. I don't know that I've made it yet, so probably.
You know what they say, Jess?
What?
If you can make it here,
You can make it
you
anywhere.
can make it anywhere.
It's
Or wait,
true.
is that New York they say that about?
That is New York.
Alrighty, what are we talking about today?
I want to talk about this goal that people have for a perfect CRM. A perfect CRM.
Is that the same thing or different than the perfect database?
It's the same thing to me. Same thing to me.
So is a CRM just a database to you, Jess?
No, but in this conversation, I'm talking about the same thing. A CRM is not the same thing as a database.
Okay, because my answer to the perfect database and the perfect CRM are probably two different things.
Okay, well, tell me about that.
The perfect CRM is the one that gets used fully.
Okay, and that is not what we're talking about here. So, what is the perfect database to you?
A myth.
Yeah, and that's what I want to talk about, the myth of the perfect
We're on a
database.
roll of myths. Jess is clearly having database management issues with clients. Anybody who wants to know what's going on in Jess's world, all you have to do is watch the titles and focus of our programming.
Yeah, well, this has been something that I've wrestled with clients for a really long time. It's actually something I wrestled with myself for a while, which is having a perfect database, having a clean, perfect, everything's in order database. And I've more and more, as I've worked kind of through this whole RevOps thing, realized that one, that's never going to happen unless you have no data in there, and two, it's not necessarily the right path to go.
What do you mean it's not the right path to go?
I don't think the focus should be on having a perfect database. If that's your focus, then you're focused on the wrong thing. I don't think we ask the right question when we talk about having this what I believe to be a myth as well of a perfect database. You're not talking about what is it that you want the database to do, what information do you need from it, is it actionable? You're not asking the right questions.
Okay, tell us more.
So, there tends to be this want, and it frequently coincides for us with a new implementation, because that's usually when we run into these conversations of a new implementation of a database, of wanting the data to be perfect and clean, and there to be no duplicates, and all of my data is going to be right. It touches on reporting, which we can get into later, but I don't think that's the right question to ask, because the problem is, if you're focused on that, you're not focused on, the first question you got to ask yourself is, what is the data that you're going to use in the database? Because that's what I would focus on cleansing. Because if you're trying to cleanse the whole thing and you've got a database of, 500,000 records, that's a mountain that you've got to climb. And you want every single record to be 100% perfect and 100% accurate. And if you're not going to touch every single record, in every way. That doesn't make sense to say, okay, every single data point on every single record that I have in the database is going to be 100% accurate, 100% filled in. Because if you're not going to use that data, why are you spending time on that? You should be focused on really what are you using the database for, and what data needs to be accurate, and what data are you going to use.
Yeah, I agree.
We solved it.
So, I mean, we've talked about databases before, and we've talked a little bit about this whole idea of there are no perfect databases. So, kind of what's the plot of your focus today?
So it's a couple of things. I see it in a few places. So one thing is, one piece in particular that prompted this is we have a couple of clients actually who are dealing in integrations, and they want the data completely accurate in both systems. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. What we need to look at is what are we reporting on? What does that report need to do? What does that need to drive? And what are we wanting the data to do? So for instance, one of the clients for their integration, they need to have their phone numbers formatted in a particular way. So that should be a focus on cleaning the database, is getting the phone number formatting correctly, because they need that to go into the other system to contract. We don't need the whole contact record to be necessarily clean, but we do need that piece to be 100% clean and ideally filled in, versus having every single data point on the contact record filled in. So again, you've got to look at what are you doing? What are you know, what's the goal? What are you
Why
trying
do
to
you think
accomplish?
this is a problem? Why do you think this is a problem?
I think that I think one thing is there's this idea that makes us feel good of having this, like we talked about, perfect database. I think that makes us feel good. That makes us feel like the system's working, whether it is or not. I get to check that box, and I get to say, okay, the database is right. I think looking at what do we want it to do and being able to segment out where do you focus on in the database, I think that's a hard question to ask, because then you've got to do certain things like say, okay, well, what are the contacts or companies in the database that really matter and why? And so that gets to business process and defining that. And I think that's a hard question to ask. So it's easier for us to say, well, just clean the whole database, rather than really figure out where is the focus and what are the things that we're focusing on and what are we solving for and cleaning the database.
Okay, so let's stay focused.
Okay.
Why do you think this is a problem? You kind of took everybody on a journey, and I kind of lost the path, so I'm sure they did too.
I think it's a problem because if everything is a priority, then nothing's a priority. And when you talk about striving for,
you can't argue with the fact that our data should be accurate, can you?
Which data? I can argue, because if you're not paying attention to half of your database, then you don't need that data to be accurate. You don't need all of that data to be accurate. If you're not using job title, for instance, in your outreach, which some people don't.
Yeah, but I'm not using it right now, but what if I use it in the future?
Then that should be a focus when you use it in the future. But to focus on it right now, when you've got other things that you likely need to be focused on, doesn't really make sense.
So I should ignore it?
Yeah, you should ignore it.
Do you really believe that?
I think you should. I think if it's taking up headspace and distracting you from what you should be focused on, then yes, you should ignore it, which does have a tendency to happen when you're talking about trying to make sure everything's accurate.
Why do you think this is such a problem?
Because it's unrealistic. There's no.
But why do you think the problem exists? Like, why do you think not what is the consequence of it?
Okay.
Why do you think this is such a problem? What's causing this? What's causing people to be focused on this? Let me ask you this: when does this problem exhibit itself most acutely?
When you're about to launch.
Or
a new CRM. So when you're about to launch a team on the database, so when they're about to start using it, or right after they've started using it.
So tell me about right after they started using it.
You start seeing things, because you've got real actual use cases of people utilizing the system, and where you didn't see things before, you start to see things because you're paying attention to it now in a different way.
So is the issue that you see before someone launches a new CRM and their issue around data, does it show itself the same?
No.
So is it the same problem then?
Probably not. No, it wouldn't be the same problem. No. So it does manifest itself in those two instances, either right before launch or right after launch.
Give me a real life example of what's happening right after the launch.
You realize that, emails aren't accurate when you've launched an email campaign. That's happened before. You realize how many emails in your CRM aren't accurate once you've started actually emailing out.
So are you suggesting that I shouldn't worry about emails then?
No, I'm not saying you shouldn't worry about emails. I'm saying you should identify. So the problem is you hear that and then you go to, well, what else is inaccurate? Well, we need to clean the whole database. Like that seems to be the place that people go to. Is like, okay, well, if emails are inaccurate, what else is inaccurate? There's probably a whole bunch of stuff in here, and then people start digging in and finding things, blank fields, inaccurate data, formatting it. Okay, well, we need to clean the whole thing up because the database is a mess. And it's like, no, we talked about emails, and if we got to clean up emails so that way our email outreach goes to the right person, and then let's focus on emails. But we don't need to jump from that to the whole of the database, and there's a tendency to do that.
And so what do you think is the cause of this problem?
I think it's a worry that...
It's a worry?
Well, probably not a worry. It's a paranoia that
Well, see, I would challenge you there, because just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you.
Well, I agree with that, but
true or false, data should be accurate.
True.
Okay. The data is inaccurate. It should be accurate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I agree with that in theory. It's a nice concept.
I agree with it in reality.
So you think all of the data should be accurate?
I think all the data should be accurate.
Should be accurate.
Should.
Can all the data be accurate?
No.
Is the question. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Like I said, there's a want to bring order.
That's not the cause.
You're killing me.
You were getting close. I think.
Well, I was getting close, and then you cut me off.
Is worry sufficient? Is worry a sufficient enough term?
Probably not.
So what do you think the cause is?
I'm scared.
Fear.
Scared. Yeah, I'm scared that something's going to be wrong and I'm going to miss something, or something's going to get screwed up. Fear of making a mistake. Fear of
the unknown.
Yeah.
When everything's a priority.
Nothing's a priority.
What's the key to having a priority?
Understanding.
Tell me more.
You'd have to, again, it goes to what I said about understanding what you're trying to do. Like you have to answer the question, what are you trying to do with the data? What are your goals? What is your team trying to do?
Hold on. You have to answer the question to have a priority. You have to answer the question, what are you trying to do with the data?
No.
Okay. This is the episode, everybody, where we build a little bit of empathy for Jess.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody gets a peek behind the curtain of how we operate.
Well, Jess is also getting a little bit of an understanding of the origination of this problem, and
you have to know what the problems are to be able to prioritize.
How do you know what the problems are?
You got to define it. Oh, you've got to you need to define them. I don't know. I don't know where you're going with this.
Where should you begin a journey?
Beginning. It's a very good place to start.
Is it?
At the end.
You're just going to keep guessing all over the place.
I am, because I don't know where you're going with this.
Well, tell me what you think. Where's a good place to begin the journey? Where's the best place to begin the journey? If you want the journey to be successful.
With the end, where are you going? What's the goal?
Why are you saying that? You're just guessing that's what I'm
No, I'm not guessing that's what you're thinking. I think
so if you're one of the few people in the world that's ever gone to Disney World and said, yeah, I have no problem. Yeah, it worked. Everything went like a charm. Right?
I don't know if I'm one of the few people, but I did say that. Yes.
Certainly one of the minority, right? And what'd you tell me? Why'd you tell me everybody has problems at Disney?
Because they don't plan. Because Disney requires an
where do
immense
you
amount of
plan? How do
planning.
you begin your planning?
What are the things you want to do? What
You're at Disney. You're at the end. You're defining what you want.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you want to get? What do you want to hire Disney for? What do you want to get out of Disney from this trip?
Got to figure out what the objective is.
Yeah.
Got to define what success is.
Yeah.
How do you address the fear of the unknown?
You define what success looks like.
You define success.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you do?
You outline the path to get there.
You establish a hypothesis of the path to get there.
Yeah.
And then what else do you do? So in your plan for Disney, did you only have one route?
No.
You had, well, if the line here is too long.
Yeah.
Or if the kids start to melt down here.
Correct. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Sure.
You begin to identify what are the potential problems. And then how are we going to respond to those potential problems?
Yeah.
Now, do you define, going back to a business scenario, do you define success as, we're a $50 million company en route to becoming a $500 million company, and we need this, and this, and we need clean data because of that. Do you define the end? We're a $500 million company with, today we have 50 people. We're going to have 1,000 salespeople. 50 salespeople. Is that what you define? Is that how you then mark the journey?
No, because you have to have waypoints. So you have to have certain goals.
Why do you have to have those waypoints?
Because you don't know if you're on the right path. If you don't have those waypoints, because that change is too drastic from 50
Correct.
to 1,000. And then also, I think the other thing that you benefit from on waypoints is that's a hypothesis, as you said. And that hypothesis might change once you get to that first waypoint. You realize, okay, this is actually what it's going to look like.
The problem is, if you go too far, you can't map transformation.
Yeah.
How do you know how big the journey should be between waypoints?
That I don't know.
What's your best answer?
I guess I would say something that you're confident you could measure, and I don't know how else to articulate that. Something you're confident that you could hit. I don't know.
So it's what I refer to as, you've got to identify the points of controllable variance.
Okay. Yeah.
So the less the variance, think of it this way: waypoints come sailing term.
Yep.
And if I'm in, clear waters, clear winds, weather's perfect, very small variance, my waypoints will be one distance. If the seas get turbulent and hurricanes on the path, your waypoint shorten, right? So you got to take a look at how much of the change is there. So by the way, if you're on the beginning of a journey, you're going to have shorter waypoints. Beginning of a database journey, you're going to have shorter waypoints, right? Now you got to remember you're measuring to two places. You're measuring to where do we want to be at this waypoint, right? Now, what we recommend kind of as a default waypoint, if you're in a growth mode, is you should have 90-day waypoints. There are times that you should have waypoints shorter than 90 days. As a general rule in business, I think 90 days tends to work pretty well. If you're going to go shorter, then you better have massive growth and massive resources. A company like Amazon, a company like Apple, they do their waypoints are shorter than 90 days. But one of the dangers that I see is if you measure too frequently, you create or if you judge too frequently, you actually create more turbulence than you solve.
Yep.
In a business environment, because you just don't give things enough time, or you begin to look at only things that have short-term impacts. And I think you hit points of diminishing returns there. So for those of you listening, if you've got a clear idea of what your waypoint is, then great. And by the way, 90 days is kind of the overall waypoint. I will likely have waypoints shorter than that. For example, we had one where we were testing out some paid and our waypoint was 1 week. Like, hey, we're going to run this. We're going to run a test. We're looking to just get a really quick sample, get a really quick sense of something. And,
right.
And there was a reason behind that. So the reason I think that the reason that the database issue keeps coming up is the database issue isn't about the database.
Right.
It's about fear of the overall journey. And by the way, I'd ask you, the companies that have better, clearer process, do they tend to have more worries or less worries about that database issue?
Less, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that because their databases are better, cleaner? No, it's because they have a clearer picture on what they're going, where things are, what matters. You know, God, it's probably about 4 years ago, we ran the webinar, The Keys to Successful RevOps. I forget the exact title of it, where we defined RevOps, or at least we defined strategic RevOps, as the strategic coordination of all market-facing, revenue-oriented systems, processes, and activities designed to increase velocity, optimize throughput, and reduce the effort required to solve for the customer and achieve revenue objectives, right? So if the revenue objectives aren't clear, I'll oftentimes ask somebody, so where do you want to be revenue? You know, what kind of revenue growth do you want to see in the next 3 years? And their answer is as much as we can. My response is I can't do anything with that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you got to have a goal. Yeah.
Well, in fairness, as much as we can is a goal. It is a
but it's not a measure, but you have to have a something you can actually measure against. You can't measure against.
Why do people say that though? Why do they then struggle to give an actual number?
Because finding the actual number is hard, and it's an unknown, and people aren't comfortable with unknowns. So, you know, and once you put a number on paper,
actually, you know what? Not quite. Close, but not quite.
Okay.
Because it's a decision.
Well, that's where I was about to go. Once you put a number on paper, I'm now held much more accountable to that, and you know, if I don't hit that,
you know, accountability is one piece. The other piece is, well, what if I pick a number and I could have had more?
Yeah, 100%.
Which I would say is not accountability, but that's the fear. You know, that's FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Right? But you know, all of this comes down to making a trade-off, and the reason that the answer to the question on should data, you asked me, do I believe data should be accurate? Do I believe all data should be accurate? My answer was yes.
It should.
The second part of it is at what cost?
Yeah.
Right. And what I'm going to say is the company that's winning, and I don't mean winning against others. So I'm talking about the infinite game winning, is not the company with the cleanest database. Right. Now, where I disagree with you, and I think if we weren't in this podcast environment today, I don't think you would have answered in quite the same way. Job titles aren't right. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and say job titles should be close to right. Okay. So how do we clean them? Well, we should make an objective that reps should be cleaning records as they're going through and talking. Yep. And we're going to take a look and see how many job titles have been updated in the last 90 days.
And that makes people very uncomfortable because they want it cleaned now.
You know, I don't disagree. I disagree with that. I disagree with that.
Why do you disagree with that?
Because the people who are saying I want all job titles to be clean now haven't answered the second question, at what cost?
Right.
So in the absence of, and remember in my scenario, I said, well, what if we want to use job titles in the future? You said, well, worry about it then.
Yeah.
I'm saying, you know, again, the world infinity exists between 0 and 1. Right. And so what I would say is the companies that are worried about that, and think about the companies that you're thinking about, right, don't have clarity around the objective, aren't, by the way, internally are often not measured on progress.
Right.
They're measured on other things.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. One of them, you know, it's kind of hard to measure against objectives because of the nature of their industry, like in terms of what, again, I actually can't, I realize that made no sense to anybody, but for me to explain it would give too much away about a client, which we won't do. But you've seen how we talked about the fact. I mean, you've seen people respond and they go, oh, okay, yeah, that, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, and realizing, and I think sometimes the place where it becomes hard for us and why you're frustrated by this is more because we're in the client service business. Right.
Probably.
So, which is to say, hey, you know what? If you want all the data clean, we can do that. Okay. No one's allowed to touch the database for the next 6 months.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Right. And so what's happened is the focus has fallen onto the process. Like, what's the prime directive at Imagine? The business process must drive the technology. The tech should never drive the business process. Well, measuring, like, the objective is not to have a clean database.
Right. Yeah.
Right. The clean database is the means. It's not the ends. So, and by the way, what do people do all the time? They mistake the means for the ends, right? Because it's much easier to define process than to define the outcomes, right? And by the way, when you define the outcomes, this should probably we should consider adding this to one of our principles. Be maniacally focused on the outcome. Be maniacally focused on the destination.
Not
be insanely flexible. Isn't that interesting? Two forms of insanity: maniacal and just insanely flexible on the path, right? And what what humans all have a tendency to do, and certainly in certain businesses. And by the way, think about this: the businesses that you're having these issues with, I'm going to go out on a limb because I don't know them all off the top of my head. They are much more, at least the people are much more operations focused.
Yes.
Right. And so, like, if I'm an architect and I'm speculating and I'm leaving things open because we'll figure that out, that might cause problems.
Yeah, I laugh about that because I used to work at an architecture firm, and
that might be,
tensile
strength or whatever the word, right?
And,
as long as it's close.
Yeah, no.
Right, we're building the world's biggest drawbridge. As long as it's close.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you come from that background, it's hard. It's really hard, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to operate in a world of, sales and marketing is about being less wrong. It's not about being more right. And the reason for that is, if I'm building a building, the laws of physics and the laws of whatever laws go into building buildings, they don't change. That's why we call them laws.
Yeah.
Right. Sales and marketing, going to market, is open. And by the way, if I were to say, look, I want to build a 10-story building that has this functionality, I want it to be 1 million square feet. And they come back and they say, okay, here's the plans, here's how much it's going to cost. And I say, no, I only want to spend 1/10 of that. No one's going to entertain me on that.
Right. Yeah.
And you know what's interesting? For all that I just said about all that aspect, shit happens when you're building buildings.
It's true.
And there's process for, like, if you waited to have it all perfect, even there, it's not actually as perfect. So so I'm gonna go out on a limb and say the underlying cause of this desire for the perfect database is lack of clarity about the structure and the approach.
Yep.
And it's a lot easier to debate about a database than it is to debate about structure and approach.
Absolutely.
So what should we do next time we have a database issue? We got to push the attention to another place, right? We got to go back into that. And I'm going to go back on what I said. I believe there is such a thing as a perfect database.
And what is that?
A database that enables us to increase velocity, optimize throughput, and reduce the effort to solve for the customer and achieve revenue objectives.
Yeah.
Right. You know what another definition of the perfect database is? The one that's getting a little bit better every day. And by getting a little bit better more often than not, it means it's getting a little less worse. So I'd also say here's another measurement. Here's another principle when it comes to, I would say this is the principle for cleaning a database. Measure by the improved data, never measure by the missing data. Because what happens is, and I actually saw somebody who did a LinkedIn post who talked about this, VP of sales who was this wonderful VP of sales, but he was talking to and they were scared of the VP. And it came down, it was this one of these stupid freaking LinkedIn little posts to get you, to click to expand. Anyways, I hate the LinkedIn algorithm. And it was, 9 times out of 10, VP. But if it's about data, then that's worthy to be scared because they were afraid to put in bad data.
Yeah.
And I replied, look, that sounds to me like ops gone bad, right? And when you focus things on minimizing bad data, the best way to minimize bad data, just minimize the data.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
See, what a lot of people don't. I mean, this also gets to a question of what's the accurate data. But and job titles is a fun one. It's an important one in that the problem with job titles is they change. I mean, how?
Well,
a B2B list atrophies 22% per year.
Yeah.
It's got to be 35-40% if you look at titles.
They change, and they're also like increasingly inconsistent with how companies utilize them. Like there's a lack of a consistency in naming convention across the board, and people are getting more and more creative with their job titles, which is making it a bigger challenge to kind of really determine who's in what role.
And so to us, one of the things, by the way, this is another point. Why do you want to know the job title?
Yeah.
Right. Well,
exactly.
Typically I want to know the job title because the job title gives me insight into their context. So I reply, oh, you want to know the role. You want to understand the role. Oh, you want to be able to contextualize the message. Oh, okay. Well, that's a different thing.
Right. Right. And then the question is, does job title really accomplish that? And is it, how do we capture that data, and how are you using job titles to dictate that?
So what year is this? 13 years ago, I wrote an article for the Washington Business Journal called The 5 Laws for Creating Demand.
Mm-hmm.
And the first law was know and understand your customer better than they know and understand themselves. And the thing that makes me saddest every day I'm in this business working with good businesses. I mean, we work with good businesses. We don't work with shitty businesses. Is how little they really know about their customer.
Oh, I know.
And when you don't understand the plot, when you don't understand the story, do you know what you seek? You seek precision. You mistake precision for accuracy.
Yep.
Right. We've got a client. He's the head of marketing. He continues to get promoted in his marketing vertical. He's now in charge of marketing for the company that owns all of the peer companies.
Yep.
Right. If we ever marketed to him like a marketer,
oh yeah,
we'd be right. He's not that's not his mindset. So the precision would say marketing, but that's not accurate.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And understanding what that means and understanding, I'm still blown away by how many people and how the biggest harm inbound marketing ever did was it created this perception of persona as the leading element, as opposed to, like, to me, persona is really important, but it's a subset of ideal client profile, right? You can't have one, you can have ideal client profile without persona, but you can't have persona without ideal client profile.
Yeah.
Yet, just how bad ideal client profiles are and how little people understand. And by the way, what's one of the main reasons why ideal client profiles are so weak? Well, to really define your ideal client, what you're really defining more than your ideal client is who's not your ideal client. You got to make the choice. You got to make the decision. And so I think those are the places where, rather than being in the market and learning the learning, and, it's this idea. So, it's less about pursuit of the perfect database than pursuit of, the myth that there's this precise formula.
Yeah.
That if I just get all my stuff in order, right? If I just buy the right clubs.
Yeah, exactly.
Then golfing won't be difficult for me.
Well, and I'm so glad that you brought up the concept of losing the plot, because that is increasingly the place where I notice we run into this problem, and actually I see it happen kind of over and over. So I did mention that this surfaces itself most frequently when we launch a team or launch a new database, or when we're about to launch, but it does resurface itself with some of our clients we've had longer, and it's always when we lose the plot of what is it we're trying to do, and having to bring them back there. So I think that is definitely one of the causes of this, is we forget what is it exactly we're trying to do here.
Yeah, I think when people lose the context of the situation, they microscope.
Yep.
I think the lesson to us is we've got to be reinforcing the context. We've got to be reinforcing the why.
Well, and when we're able to do that well, then we're able to bring them around to, okay, like what you talked about continuous improvement and being able to kind of put a better plan together of, we're going to focus on this subset. We're going to do this now. This is the next step. And this is the third step. And remember, we're striving toward, getting this piece locked in, because that's going to enable our sales reps to better do their job. For instance, when we're able to do that and articulate that well, it's easier to kind of focus them in on the right pieces versus trying to get everything precise, as you talked about.
Yeah, an excellent job for people to do that are listening to this is define what are the real jobs that your database is doing, and the goal is not to create the lengthiest list possible. It's what are the active jobs that it's responsible. What are the critical elements of the business that the database is supporting, and then connect the dots to that.
Yep.
And then, by the way, you might have. We had a client that had, a 500,000 contact database that was totally a mess, and I remember what we told them, and it took a while for them to get it. And by the way, now they're on a massive growth. Was, you don't really have 500,000 contacts.
Yeah.
Right. You really don't have any contacts. What we need to do is start identifying, what's the first group, and we can fish within your database to start cleaning it. But there's that myth that, oh, well, we have this 500,000. It's like, okay, you can spend all your time trying to clean the database, or you can get growing and have the database fall behind you. And I think that we definitely fall into the camp. There are areas where certain data needs to be accurate, certainly, but I would say there again, it's always at what cost.
Yep.
Right. If I had a team of 100 people that I was willing to support, I could have cleaned that database.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it really is, you've got to know where you're going. You've got to know what are the key, what game, what's the game that you're playing? How are you going to win? What's the best, what are the key inflection points, waypoints to winning? And then prioritize from there. And by the way, don't worry about waypoint 2 until you get to waypoint 1. Don't lose sight of waypoint 2. But then, the number of people who are like, well, we can't do that because it won't scale. Well,
yeah.
Guess what? Nothing scales until, if you couldn't do what scales.
Yeah.
Right. So it really is finding that sweet spot.
Yep. All right. So you hit on the waypoint, which was like one of my key takeaways. Make sure you define your waypoints. Make sure you're insanely focused on the outcome. I do think that should become one of our principles. And I really liked what you said about sales and marketing is about being less wrong and not more right. I think we forget that. I think it's a good reminder.
Well, hell, this was probably 15, 16 years ago. Maybe even in 17. I think it was one of the early blogs I wrote, which was, I talked about the show House.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
it was about 6 or 7 years ago, because I think that was before my time here as an employee.
No, that would have been 16, 17 years
ago. 16, 17. Oh, 2005. Sorry. 2005. Oh, okay. Yeah. I was going to say, I know it was before I was here because I read it before I was an employee. So
yeah. And for those of you, House was, watch the show House. He's wrong. Right. It's hypothesis. And, one of my favorite episodes says, well, if we give him that medication and it doesn't work, it could make things worse and he could die. And he goes, well, and House's response was basically, well, if it makes things worse, that's one more point we can add to the diagnosis to figure out. Right.
Yeah.
And
so go watch House.
They could have stood around waiting to figure out what the problem was and the patient dies. Right. Or they could be making progress.
Yeah. Yep. So go watch House. It's a great show.
And that's, by the way, is why I say, You know, and actually a lot of, you know, I am going to say that this is more important. I thought this was just going to be a throwaway, but it's really more important than that. One of the problems is that people have taken the game of chess and used that as the model for running your life, running a business, making decisions.
Yeah.
Right. And the problem with chess is a game of perfect information. And so if we're using the game of chess as the analogy, as the metaphor, then you need perfect information. Right.
Yeah.
What we're really playing is poker, right? Which is a game of imperfect information.
Yep.
Right. And by the way, because I've learned that people occasionally misinterpret what I'm saying, your customer is not the opponent. The rest of the, you know, the context of your world could be competitors, could be others. You know, the point is you're having to make decisions. Your objective is the pot. You're making decisions. You're making bets from imperfect information. And no matter what you do, you know, like, okay, you have everybody's job title. So what? What does that actually change?
Right.
Right. You know, it changes a little bit, but not a lot. Play poker, don't play chess.
And I think we end on that note. I like that.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the RevOps Show. Define your process, define your goals, set your waypoints, and go from there. We would all love to have the perfect database, but to get there takes a lot of time, energy, patience, and process. That's why it's so important that we focus on what matters to us and set those waypoints. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to go subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, leave us a review, and share the episode. If you have any questions you would like to ask Doug or Jess about RevOps, email me at hannah@imaginellc.com or hit us up on Twitter @DemandCreator. Until next time, remember, you can't solve your upstream problems downstream.